The Ukrainian government says its forces are gaining momentum and taking back territory amid fierce fighting along the south and eastern front lines. Kyiv claims its troops have recaptured a string of Russian-occupied villages along the Donetsk-Zaporizhzhia region border. Fred Pleitgen joins us now live from Zaporizhzhia. Fred, good to have you with us. Have we managed to verify just what's been recaptured by the Ukrainian authorities and the forces, or is it just their word for now?
Well, there's certain areas that we have actually been able to verify or at least geolocate where those areas are, where we've seen some videos of Ukrainian troops marching or going into villages, going into buildings in some villages and raising the Ukrainian flag. And a lot of that, Julia, seems to be happening in the sort of southeastern part of the front, from where a lot of those offensive actions of the Ukrainian military have been taking place. And what we've heard is that they're sort of marching southward from those areas, apparently trying to break through Russian defenses. It's quite interesting. We haven't really heard anything yet from officially from the Russian Defense Ministry, but there's Russian military bloggers who usually are very well informed, who talk directly to Russian units, who say that they are quite concerned about the situation on that part of the front line, and they also say that in that area the Ukrainians are advancing. Nevertheless, there do seem to be some significant losses also on the part of the Ukrainians. The front line is, of course, very long, and in some places the Russians have said that they have been able to hold Ukrainian advances up and destroy a lot of armor, including Western donated armor, speaking about Leopard 2 main battle tanks provided by the Germans, but also, for instance, open source intelligence indicates some 16 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, of course, provided by the United States. That's a large chunk of the vehicles that the Ukrainians got from the U.S. So it seems as though the Ukrainians are making gains, but those gains certainly are coming at a price. And, you know, the big question on the ground, of course, has been whether or not this is really the big counteroffensive that the Ukrainians have been talking about. Certainly there were some indications by the Ukrainian president this weekend. However, there was also a video that was put out by the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency here of this country, where he was just sitting in his chair for several seconds, and then a sort of writing came on the screen saying, "Plans love silence." So the Ukrainians continuing to say, if this is the big offensive, they certainly aren't willing to talk about it. But it is pretty clear, Julia, that along pretty much the entire front line here in Ukraine, the Ukrainians have the initiative, while the Russians aren't making any gains really significantly in any areas that we can see. If we look, for instance, at Bakhmut, which of course is a town that has seen a great deal of fighting over the past couple of months, there also the Ukrainians right now are saying that they are the ones who are making significant gains on the battlefield, while the Russians are the ones who are pulling back, Julia.
But to your point, certainly the Ukrainians not giving any further information away about what's going on. Fred Pleitgen there in Zaporizhzhia for us. Thank you.
Ukraine says Russia is on the defensive when it comes to fighting around Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. This comes as Ukrainian armed forces liberated villages along the eastern front lines. Ukraine's deputy defense minister says 3 villages in the Donetsk region have been recaptured, and Russian pro-military bloggers are warning its forces should, quote, expect the pressure to intensify soon.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials say water levels are receding in parts of Dnipro River's west bank, but nearly 50 settlements are still flooded. It's been nearly a week since the Nova Kakhovka dam collapsed, unleashing a torrent of water into surrounding areas.
Claire Sebastian joins us now to discuss these stories. Claire, obviously Ukraine is keen to garner momentum and early successes in this counteroffensive. We're hearing about 3 villages being liberated. Obviously there's extreme operational silence from Kyiv, though, about the future plans. What do we know at this stage?
Well, I think all we can tell from the location of these villages is that it could potentially fit with the strategy that we've been discussing now for several weeks, if not months, of essentially, I don't know if we can pull up the map again to show it, but cutting in half Russia's gains so far. And if you look at where that is, just at the top of that front line where Russia occupies in the red there, that is really the narrowest strip linking Ukrainian-controlled territory with the Sea of Azov. So possibly fits with that strategy of cutting off the land bridge to Crimea. I think the other thing to bear in mind here is it's not just there where we're seeing fighting. We're seeing pockets of fighting around Bakhmut. There's evidence further up, even near Kupiansk, which is pretty much the northernmost part of the eastern front line. Either they're keeping them guessing, or perhaps there's still some probing activity. But I think that is key to understand. This isn't, as of now, a localized counteroffensive like we saw in the Kyiv region in the spring of 2022, like we saw in Kharkiv last autumn. It's over a widespread area. But this is hard. This is a hard fight for Ukraine. We're hearing from open source intelligence firm, a Dutch one called Oryx, that They've lost 16 US-supplied armoured vehicles, Bradleys, in the last several days. They say that's about 15% of what the US has supplied in total in terms of those Bradleys. Russia has overall, according to this firm, lost much more equipment over the course of this war, but Russia is making a lot of these attacks on Western equipment and Ukrainian strongholds of equipment and forces in general. So, you know, military analysts will tell you much harder to attack than defend, certainly in terms of losses.
And in President Zelensky's Sunday night address, he said that the ICC has begun its probe of the Kakhovka Dam disaster. What will that involve?
Yeah, we don't know yet. We haven't been able to confirm this with the ICC itself, but Zelensky is saying that this was on the request of Ukraine by their prosecutor's office, that officials have already visited the site. We need to try to understand what the parameters of the investigation are, whether it's a war crimes investigation. We know that the Geneva Convention covers the destruction of installations that unleash damaging forces. They call that, can include dams. So that might be part of the investigation, but we don't know yet. And meanwhile, as you say, a week on, they're still doing rescue efforts. Thousands of people have been evacuated. Ukraine has even said it's evacuated more than 100 people from the Russian side, the Russian-occupied side of the Dnipro River. And of course, the environmental catastrophe still unfolding.
Claire Sebastian, as always, thank you so much.